From the APREL Bulletin, number 57, August 2002. Girls Serving at the Altar and the Vocations Blight, by Sister Mary Augustine, O.P. The phenomenon of girls serving at the altar has been around for so long now, first illegally and now legally, that any inflammation it may originally have caused to the sensibilities of the Catholic faithful appears to be subsiding. As for bishops and priests, the 1994 reversal of the traditional norms regarding the exclusion of women and girls from service at the altar, made explicit in the third instruction on the correct implementation of the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, 1970, opened what was for some a Pandora's box of liturgical horrors, and for others a treasure trove of opportunity for gender equity. While the latter, afire with dedication to creating inclusivity and liturgical participation, began or continued to enlist girls for altar service, the news that the canons of the Church do not support the traditional norms came as a fierce blow to many Orthodox priests, their reactions appearing to range broadly from a kind of sorrowful defeatism to a desire to escape into other liturgical rites. This is not just an emotional issue being fought out between the liberal and conservative elements in the Church over an ancient and unbroken tradition. It seems to me, as a theologically unlettered person in the pews, that there is more in this particular tradition than meets the eye, which is why it is ancient and unbroken, well, until 1994. Why did the Church refuse to allow female altar servers for 2,000 years? At the most basic anthropological level, the reason would seem to be this, that our Lord Jesus Christ is a male, and the priest who stands in his place at the altar is a male. And in no civilized human society do we have young girls serving, attending on grown men. Certainly young daughter will fetch the paper and a cup of coffee for her beloved daddy. The filial reverence and homage here makes the gesture charming and quite in keeping with the fourth commandment, and so she will probably do it with equal ease and joy for her beloved mummy, unless she is being bullied into it by an exploitative parent who thinks that servile labour is what little daughters are there for. But the only other situations in which young girls are enlisted to attend on the persons of men, per se, are those sick customs of ancient pagan kings and potentates, harems and the like, along with certain comparable depravities in our own no less pagan, but sometimes more socially critical, modern world. Little girls are not found in the haunts of modern sportsmen, just as they are not found attending on the knights and warriors of old. Around such heroes and models, young men and boys may gather, ready to emulate them and to perform certain menial services for them. Girls wait on women. The virgins keeping vigil for the bridegroom in the gospel parable are not waiting on him, but are messengers of the bride, escorting him to her. It would be a sight to arouse interest, if not horror, should a modern bridegroom be attended by a bevy of little girls. When children choose or are chosen to wait on adults of the same sex as themselves, this is because the child identifies with the needs and interests of that sex, seeing in the adult a figure of his or her own future life. Those youngsters who have not as yet been culturally conditioned by the politically correct adults around them operate out of their own instincts and predilections which dispose them towards the great destiny for which we were all made, our human fulfillment, precisely as male or female. They are disposed towards motherhood or fatherhood, whether physical or spiritual. Little boys naturally desire to help their fathers or other admired adult males, at work or at recreation, while little girls delight in accompanying and helping their mothers in homemaking, childcare, and womanly recreations. These inbuilt learnings are only signs that here, as a vital part of God's plan, we have fathers and mothers in the making. Granted, it is important that the horizons of both boys and girls should be broadened to include interests and activities that will enrich them as personalities and thereby make them better fathers and mothers. But it is irrational to induce in them the idea that boys can be mothers and girls fathers. The Church's sacred insights on the complex and specific roles of the sexes help us to see that there are some things which boys should not be encouraged to do, and others which are not of their very nature appropriate to girls. There are at stake fundamental truths about sexual distinction and complementarity, and who can be unaware of the terrible results in our modern society of the widespread revolt against these truths? A girl serving the priest at the altar is not just doing what comes as easily for a girl as for a boy, and perhaps more easily, carrying dishes and jugs, lighting candles, and generally adding to the aesthetic attractiveness of the sanctuary. Rather, she is there doing an intrinsically male thing, something linked symbolically, anthropologically, and even theologically with a vocation exclusively reserved by the Son of God himself to men. A girl can never be a priest. A boy, given that he has been singled out by God and fitted by grace for the vocation, can do so. None of the activities involved in altar serving add to a girl's education or personal versatility, as perhaps a boy's personality will be enhanced by being able to care for babies, or a girl's by being familiar with plumbing or car engines. She is engaged here in something quite useless and incongruous and fundamentally untruthful. What about the symbolic and theological aspects? Firstly, the server at the altar is not serving the altar or the congregation, but the priest, who functions at the altar in persona Christi. The server is waiting on the person of Christ present in the person of the priest. He is a necessary servant, and feminists should acknowledge this, because the priest has the human limitations of not being able to do everything and be everywhere in the sanctuary. If he wants to do the liturgy well, he needs extra hands and feet to carry and hold books, to fetch water and wine, ring bells, and so on. And so the altar server becomes a set of auxiliary limbs for the priest, an extension, however slight, of the priest's person. What kind of strange messages begin to come through when this server is a girl? Isn't this carrying unisex too far? And if these messages create strange concepts in our minds about the identity of the priest, they become quite blasphemous when applied to our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the real priest at this sacrifice, the real bridegroom, about whose identity as true God and true man we should never allow any kind of ambiguities to play. Catholics with even the most vestigial sensitivity to true symbolism in the liturgy are offended by such ambiguities. It is not simple arch-conservatism or liturgical pickiness when members of the faithful avoid, where and if they can, masses served by girls. The other thing to note, and the Church notes it deliberately and explicitly in her largely unread document, in which the question as to the legality of female servers is raised and answered, is that the Church does not advocate them. In Acta Consiliorum, coming from the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legal Texts in June 1992, promulgated by the Holy Father in July 1992, and sent to episcopal conferences as a circular letter in 1994, the Church emphasizes the clear tradition of service at the altar for boys, and proclaims it to be a duty of bishops and priests to see, quote, that the ministry of boys at the altar is continued and promoted, end quote. It affirms the strong, time-tested link between the practice of serving at the altar and the emergence of a priestly vocation. It allows the bishop to permit female altar servers only for special reasons, which do not derogate from the above tradition, and he is required to explain the situation to the faithful, pointing out the alternative modes of participation in the liturgy which are open to women. The document emphasizes that the office of service at the altar, like the offices of lector and extraordinary minister of the Eucharist, are not permanent rights or duties, that they are subject to the guidance of the bishop, and that there is no law compelling them, either for men or women. The Church makes clear in the document that no bishop is bound by permissions granted in this matter by other bishops or by the mind of the Episcopal Conference. He must make his own arrangements for the liturgical life of his diocese. Now, another more recent document has come out from the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, promulgated and in English on July 2001. This reiterates the message of the former notice and adds the saving clarification that the bishop may not require the priests of his diocese to make use of female altar servers. It seems to me that no one can read these documents and still hold that the Church thinks female altar servers to be a good idea. Yet she does allow them. Why? No doubt for the same reasons that she allows the use of extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, to cover exceptional situations. I have attended Mass celebrated by an elderly priest in the chapel of a retirement villa. The fragile old man was assisted at the altar with great delicacy and reverence by a religious sister. What would a total ban on female service at the altar have meant for him? Surely this is one of the particular situations the Church, in her merciful flexibility, is thinking of when she speaks of special reasons for the use of female altar servers. But, like a host of other pastoral permissions and provisions, which are meant to be temporal exceptions and not permanent mandates, the Church's position on girl altar servers has been turned, by those who are not really interested in the mind of the Church, into a kind of bottom-line interpretation, so as to ratify their own long-standing liturgical abuses. The Church permits this. Let's not look too closely at the fine print. In this case, as in others, there is salvation in the fine print. There would seem to be ample pretext in the Acta Consiliorum of 1992 for any bishop or priest to reverse the trend of girls serving at the altar, at least in his own domain. The most compelling point in the document of 1992 is surely that relating to the importance of encouraging boys in this ministry. This is a duty incumbent on priests and especially bishops, since, as the Church points out, this tradition is an important factor in engendering priestly vocations. It is a duty any priest or bishop can claim and act on. If he wishes to exclude girls, the onus is on those who would challenge his decision to show how it is possible to continue and promote service at the altar for boys when girls are also allowed. Obviously, there are hurdles of logic for them to overcome here. If we promote both boys and girls, we are really promoting neither. Then there are the practical issues. How do we promote boys over girls without discrimination? Moreover, if boys are not discouraged by the entrance of girls into what was once their domain, this probably only signifies that service at the altar has changed its meaning for them, being now just another job, without the deeper cultic appeal. And so we see a falling away of altar servers, both boys and girls, but especially boys. But by far the worst outcome, and one that is likely to worsen, is the impact of girl altar servers on priestly vocations. Boys are attracted to the person of a priest because he is manly, virtuous, a spiritual leader, a father, someone whose business it is to have time for the people in his pastoral care, even the youngest. They easily become fascinated by his role in the liturgy, especially if he does it well and makes some liturgical demands of his assistants. They like to be around the priest and to share in his professional knowledge and care for all things to do with the sanctuary. They sense here the importance of holy things, and are drawn by that sacred cultic aura which surrounds the mystery of the priesthood. Girls obviously do not have such a relationship with the priest. He is not a cultic hero or model for them. Even those who have been persuaded that the priesthood is not barred to them are not going to be especially interested in male models of this vocation. The weakening of the concept of priest is obvious everywhere, and the ubiquitous and bizarre sight of a dignified liturgical celebrant surrounded by little girls does a great deal to bring it to breaking point. For priests, too, this practice must be a blow to their vocational self-identity. Every time they stand at the altar, in persona Christi, to do the great definitive thing their vocation calls them to, they feel their persons invaded and their priestly significance eroded by people who have no right to be there at all. It is no wonder that some priests prefer to have no altar servers of either sex. The shootout here, as in many areas of crisis in the modern church, is between politics and our higher instincts, both natural and spiritual. The church comes down very conclusively and convincingly on the side of authentic human instincts and spiritual values. The Catholic Weekly published a report on Pope John Paul II's meeting with a large group of altar servers from various European countries. The group included both boys and girls. The Holy Father's words to these youngsters seemed to reflect the awkwardness of the situation. Having very properly exhorted the boys in the group to consider a possible call to priesthood, the Holy Father went on to suggest that the girls' service at the altar may lead on to a life of religious consecration. There is, of course, nothing about religious consecration that follows from service at the altar. The priesthood and religious life are two totally different vocations, although the two do meet in the vocation of the clerical religious. Religious are primarily witnesses. The priest is a minister. Pope John Paul II was right to point out that for both boys and girls it is devotion to Christ which should lie at the root of one's service at the altar. But it is hard to believe that such devotion in a girl or woman would lead her in this direction. In the present climate, it may not be too far-fetched to suggest that the girl who is keen to serve at the altar is less likely to become a religious than the girl whose religious and liturgical understanding causes her to see her feminine role in the church more clearly and more truly. The tendency today is to try to make our practices in liturgy, as in the faith generally, conform to the mindset and values of secular politics. The practice of girls serving at the altar is a key example of this, and while such practices continue, the liturgy will always be debased, the faith of the people eroded, and the present vocation's blight unremedied. End of article. The following is an unofficial translation of the initial Roman document of 1994, in which the dubium regarding female altar servers is resolved and explained. There does not appear to be an official Vatican translation of this document in English, nor has it been generally circulated in Australia. Acta Consiliorum, the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legal Texts, reply to the doubt proposed. The Fathers of the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legal Texts, in their Ordinary Assembly of June 3, 1992, considered that the following response should be given to the doubt proposed. Doubt: whether service at the altar can be numbered among the liturgical functions which the laity, men or women, are able to perform according to Canon 230.2. Response: in the affirmative, and according to instructions issued by the Apostolic See. The Sovereign Pontiff, John Paul II, in an audience on July the 11th, 1992, having been informed of the above decision, confirmed it and ordered it to be promulgated. Signed Vincentius Fagioli, President, and Julianus Herans Casando, Secretary. Indeed, since the Sovereign Pontiff has mandated that certain things should be indicated and made clear concerning what Canon 230.2 orders, and equally about the authentic interpretation of this canon, the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments has sent circular letters to the Presidents of Episcopal Conferences on March the 15th, 1994, pointing out and clarifying: 1. Canon 230.2 has the force of permitting, not commanding. The laity can. Hence, the permission granted by certain bishops in this matter is in no way able to have a binding force on other bishops. Therefore, any bishop, having heard the mind of the Episcopal Conference, has the faculty of prudently judging and arranging in his own diocese what is to be done for carrying out correctly the liturgical life in his own territory. 2. The Holy See observes that, attending to local circumstances, some bishops have ordered, in view of Canon 230.2, and at the same time the Holy See has warned, that it is most opportune to uphold the clear tradition which maintains service at the altar for boys. It is well known that this custom has happily brought about the increase of priestly vocations. Hence the duty remains to see that the ministry of boys is continued and promoted. 3. But if in some diocese, in view of Canon 230.2, a bishop permits that, for special reasons, the duty of serving at the altar is allowed to women, according to the norm we have declared above, this must be clearly explained to the faithful, and likewise it must be pointed out that women often perform the duty of reader in the liturgy, and that they are able to distribute Holy Communion as extraordinary ministers of the Eucharist, and to undertake other duties, as Canon 230.2 envisages. 4. It must be made clear that these liturgical offices are undertaken, quote, by temporary arrangement, end quote, at the judgment of the bishop, and there is no law in existence which says that laity, men or women, should undertake them. Signed Anthony Mary Cardinal Javier Ortas, Prefect, and Jared M. Unelo, Secretary.